Hi, it's Yay for Yarn. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made my Windmill Afghan. This Afghan is made from flat panels that I made on the Addi Express Professional Knitting Machine. I sewed the flat panels together to make the Afghan and added a border to finish it off. Keep watching to learn how you can make your own Windmill Afghan. Let's get started. These are the 4 colored strips that I'm using. I have 4 of this color, 4 of this color, 4 of this color, 4 of this color, and I'm using, so I have a total of 16 strips. I'm using 1 of each color in each block, and these are big blocks. Each one of these strips, when you uncurl it, is 5.5 inches wide. And these are 19 stitches wide, made on the Addi Professional Knitting Machine flat panel mode, and these strips are all 20 inches long. So when you uncurl these and sew them together, then you'll have 5, 10, 15, 20 inches wide, and then it'll be square with the length of the strips. And I'm sewing these together using mattress stitch. I will put the link to the mattress stitch video in the description box. This is my order of how I'm sewing them together. So once I sew all of these together for all my blocks, then I will show you how I put the blocks together. These are my blocks. I have 2 more of them, as you saw in the picture. All of these are made from strips that have been stitched together with mattress stitch. And I do have a video on that if you don't know how to make mattress stitch. But mattress stitch does not work so well when you're sewing a side edge, a lengthwise edge, like this, to a row of live stitches. All of these stitches are live. They have been threaded through with the yarn tail since they were made on the Addi. So I need to stitch these live stitches to this edge using a modified mattress stitch. And if you watch the mattress stitch video, I talk about the horizontal bars in between the first column of stitches, that is your edge stitch, and the second column. Those are the ones you're going to be stitching into, and you're going to need to count them. And you're also going to need to count how many stitches you have, live stitches. But part of the problem is that since we used mattress stitch to stitch these together, then we have like almost a seam allowance in the back, an extra stitch that's curled to the back on both sides. So that extra stitch, which is right here and right here, is going to have to be stitched through at the same time as the one next to it. The first stitch on the right side on each side of this seam is going to also have that very back stitch that's being curled to the back stitched through at the same time as it, so it looks like one stitch. So since we're not counting those two, we also need to know how many live stitches we have per strip. And my panels were originally 19 stitches wide, so I should have 17 live stitches on the right side of the work. So I have 17 stitches per stripe, and I have 4 stripes. So then I have 68 total live stitches to work into, except these 2 on the edges do not have a seam yet. But that doesn't matter because this inside edge is going to be stitched to another block, and we're going to use that edge stitch anyway. So we're not going to add that one back in, but we are going to add this one back in on the outside edge because we're going to work a binding later on, and that goes across all stitches and all edges of the blanket. So this one we're not going to count because it still needs to be stitched to this piece. So we're going to add this back in, and then we have 69. So I'm going to need approximately 138 horizontal bars on this length of fabric, and I might not have that many. So we're going to show you how to work around that and to adjust the number of stitches to bars and get it to look even and lie flat and everything. Alright, I have counted all of my live stitches and all of my rows in this strip because one horizontal bar is in each row. So I have 94 rows in this piece, but I have 69 live stitches that I need to work into that. So not every single stitch, most stitches are not going to get 2 horizontal bars because there isn't enough. So the way we're going to manipulate this is to work some stitches with 2 horizontal bars and some stitches with 1 horizontal bar. So then that way we can kind of fit the edge to make it match this one. And lengthwise, that going this way across the block, it is pretty close to being exactly the same length. So I have some green yarn here. This is the same color as this one. And I'm going to thread through my needle. It is still attached to the ball of yarn. And we're going to start at this edge, but I'm probably going to have to do this first stripe first without explaining what I'm doing because the yarn is not going to contrast with this and you won't be able to see it. So I am first going to start out by pulling, this might seem a little scary, but it's okay, pulling the string that is threaded through all your live stitches. You're going to pull that out. And if you happen to drop any, it's not a big deal, you can easily fix that. It's just stockinette stitch. So I'm going to unroll this edge here, and I'm going to split open those first 2 columns of stitches, and I'm going to kind of mattress stitch this row of horizontal bars to this row of live stitches. And I will show you how I'm going to do that when I get to the blue. Okay, now that I have worked the green strip, now I'm going to connect this blue strip, and I have already unthreaded the tail from all of my stitches that since they were made on the Addi, we always thread the tail through when we're finished instead of doing a real cast off. So what I'm going to do first for each strip of color, I'm going to take this very last visible stitch and the one that curls behind it, and I'm going to stack them up. Make sure they're not twisted and stack them right on top of each other. And I'm going to bring my needle up through the middle of both of them. And I have 94 rows in this strip. So since I have 69 stitches, it doesn't match. So 94 divided by 4 is 23.5. So I'm going to have 2 columns that have 24 and 2 columns that have 23. Except for this edge stitch right here, this one's going to have 24. So I need to pick up almost every stitch is going to need to have 1 horizontal bar attached to it. So this stripe is only going to have 23 stitches. So I am guessing at this moment that I'm going to need to pick up, 5 total stitches that have 2 horizontal bars, and all the rest need to have 1. So I'm going to try that out and see how that works, and if I don't end up getting 23, then I will, do one more that picks up 2. So I'm going to uncurl this, and find my column of edge stitches, the same one I've been working into for the green. And for this first stitch, I'm going to pick up one horizontal bar in between the edge stitch and the next stitch. And this is kind of similar to grafting. I'm going to come down in these two stacked stitches, and at the same time I'm going to come up in the middle of the next stitch. Then I'm going to pick up another horizontal bar, and then I'm going to come down into the stitch I was just in and up in the next one. And this one I'm going to take two. And I'm going to go down in the stitch I just came out of and back up in the next one. And I'm going to keep doing this until I get to these last two stitches, and then I will show you how to finish those off. Alright, so I have gotten down to almost the last two stitches. There are only two left. The third to last stitch has already been stitched through, and I've already picked up the horizontal bar for that stitch. So I'm going to go back down into that stitch, and I'm going to make sure that these two, this is the very last visible stitch and the one that's curled behind it in the seam. I'm going to stack them and bring my needle up through both of them. And make sure you don't split the yarn, because that looks bad. So then I'm going to pick up one more horizontal bar and go back down through the stacked stitches, and then I will repeat that same step on the next stripe. But first I need to check and make sure that I've picked up 23 horizontal bars. So I'm going to fold this back, and as you can see, we can count how many we picked up, because this one is the last one for the green. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So that's not enough. So I'm going to unravel this very last one. And pick it out of the horizontal bar that was attached to it. And instead of one, I'm going to pick up two of those. And go back down into those last two stacked stitches. And now that I know I have 23, the next one's going to be 24, but this one only needs 23. So I'm going to pull on the yarn and watch that seam close up and make the green yarn invisible. And once I get to the end of that section, I'm going to make sure that it's not too tight by pulling it a little bit and making sure it has a little bit of give. And then I'm going to move on to the next column and do the same thing again. Alright, now I have worked the very last strip here and joined it to this one. And so then after this, I would work the other two, I would connect the other two blocks in the same way, and then connect them to this edge, and then we'll work a binding around the whole afghan to finish it up. But I also want to show you first that I still stacked these two edge stitches here, because when I sew this seam right here, it's going to be the same as this edge. So I'm going to want, as you can see, this back stitch still curls from this long edge of the strip right here. So when this strip is stitched to the other blocks in the same way, it's still going to have those last two stitches need to be stacked. So I stacked them even though there isn't actually a seam there yet. So when I do put a seam there, then I will not have to worry about going back and undoing that last little bit and stacking those two stitches. Okay, now I have everything sewn together, and I'm going to put my border on. This is a flat panel made on the Addi Express, 10 stitches wide, and I have made this longer than I think it needs to be, so that I have extra length, so that once I'm finished, then I can shorten it down to the right length that I need it, and finish it off. I'm going to start with the beginning end of this border. And I'm going to take this tail, the starting tail, and I'm going to tug on it so that it shrinks up a little bit and makes almost a corner right there. And I'm not going to do anything with that tail. I'm going to start at this edge up here, and I'm going to attach this border around the edge of my Afghan with a row of slip stitches. And this is actually not going to be just on the edge. This is going to be a couple stitches in to keep it from curling. So I'm going to start attaching this border at the top edge of my Afghan, and I'm going to kind of encase the edge in the border. And one of the nice things about this is that all these tails from my seams and from the where I bound them off on the Addi is going to be encased in the border, so I don't have to weave them in, so that's nice. I'm going to take this mango and use this for my slip stitches. This will make a nice contrast with the border. And I have a size H 5mm crochet hook, and I'm going to attach this border around the edge of my Afghan. And I want to make sure that the edge of this Afghan, this edge right here, is kind of lined up with the edge of the border. So I'm going to insert my hook in between the edge stitch and the second stitch on my border. And then I'm going to come about 3 stitches in and insert my hook through the Afghan. And then I'm going to insert my hook again on the edge stitch on the other side of the border. And I'm going to take my mango yarn and I'm going to pull up a loop of that. And then I can skip. Actually, each time I slip stitch, I'm going to skip 2 of these horizontal bars in between stitches. Go down between the edge stitch and the first stitch in the same column of stitches that I was working in when I first went in, skip 2 ladders or horizontal bars and go in again. Again, I'm 3 rows in from the edge. And then, again, skip 2 ladders on the back of the border and slip stitch through all thicknesses. And I'm going to keep doing that until I get to the other half of this edge and the corner that will change the way that we attach this because of the live stitches. And I want to mention here that you want to keep your slip stitches fairly long because you don't want them to keep the edge from having its full length. You don't want to gather the edge, you just want to keep it flat. So now that I have reached my first vertical strip, I'm going to start working into this. And as you can see, this border lays flat and it's very thick and squishy because of the material that is rolled up inside there. So I'm going to skip the next 2 horizontal bars on my front of the border, and I'm going to insert my hook down through the center of a column of stitches, the first column of stitches. And it's actually upside down in this case because this is not the bind off edge of my strip, this is the cast on. So it's upside down, but that doesn't matter. I'm still going to slip stitch through that first column of stitches, and I want to make sure I get the back of the border, skip 2 ladders on the back of the border, and slip stitch all the way through. And so then I'm going to skip 2 ladders or horizontal bars in the front border, and I'm going to slip stitch into the next column of stitches. And you want to make sure that you're staying within the same row of stitches because if you vary and you go up or down or whatever, then it's going to be crooked or wiggly or something like that. So we want it to be straight, so we want to stay in that same row. And always make sure you catch the back of the border as well. Alright, I have almost reached my corner. Now since the edge right here of this Afghan is going to have 3 stitches encased in the border, that means I have to stop 3 stitches short on my slip stitching so that I have room to turn the corner. And I'm actually going to skip 3 horizontal bars and slip stitch almost exactly in the same stitch, but 1 row down, and skip 3 on the back as well, and slip stitch through that. And as I turn around here, it will give a slightly rounded corner, and that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to skip 3 more, and instead of going into the next stitch column, I'm going this way now. So I'm going to skip 2 horizontal bars on that row, and I'm going to skip 3 horizontal bars on the back of the border and work my slip stitch. And this helps ease that corner in a little better. So now I'm going to skip 2, because I think I've got enough missing now for the corner. No, actually I'm going to skip 3. I'm going to skip 3 and skip 2 bars of the Afghan, 3 bars of the back of the border, and I think that's enough of a corner now that it will lie down when I go down this edge. So I'm going to go down this edge the same way I did at the very beginning. Then when I get around to the other side, I will show you how to join the ends of the border together. Alright, now that I have finished almost the entire border, I need to join these 2 corners together to finish it off. I chose to do half my border in blue and the other half in the mango because I knew I wasn't going to have enough blue to go all the way around the whole thing. So I did 2 sides in the blue, and then I switched to the mango and did the last 2 sides in the mango. So now I have to just join this corner here, and then it will be all finished. And as I've been going along, I have been encasing all of the loose ends inside the tube that the border creates. So I have 1.5 more stitches left. So that's 1 more slip stitch to do. But since this is the end, I have to close it up first. So I'm going to, I did not bind this off, so I'm just going to unravel it until I am at the right length that I want it to be, because I made my border longer than I thought I was going to need so that I had extra so that I can do this at the end. Okay, now my border is to the length that I want it, so I'm going to do the same thing I did when I started this border. I pulled the end tight so that it would cinch closed. So I'm going to cut my yarn tail here, and I'm going to thread that tail through all of my stitches. And you can use a yarn needle for this if you want to. Alright, so this is all cinched shut, and I'm going to tighten it, and then I can take my slip stitch yarn and finish attaching it. And that's the last slip stitch that I can make. Now I'm going to cut this one too, and I'm going to pull my loop out until the tail comes through the front. So now I'm going to take my yarn needle and I'm going to stitch these two together, and I'm tucking the little edges of the green over here up underneath, and I want to try to make this as close to invisible as possible. It's not going to be perfectly invisible because it's not the same as the opposite corner, but it will still look nice when it's finished. I'm going to take this little green tail that's from this green panel right here, and I'm going to thread it through the tube made by the border so that it disappears. And I'm going to cut it short because this one's really long. So now I have to join these two together, and you can see if I uncinch this that if I were to just leave them straight like this, then they would look kind of weird, and this edge would not be covered by the finished edge, and neither would this one. So I'm going to cinch them both shut. And I'm going to sew them together. I'm going to take this mango thread that I cinched the end of the border with, and since the stitching right here is mango, I'm going to go down right through that stitching to the back and make sure that I come out on the back of that stitching line. And I'm going to attach that mango border edge back there to one of the stitches on the back and make a knot. And this will be hidden when I weave the tail in. And then I'm also going to take this blue tail and I'm going to attach the blue to the mango. Starting at the back, I'm going to take the blue and I'm going to take strands of mango on my needle, and then I'm going to take a strand of the blue and another strand of the mango and another strand of the blue. And I'm going to keep doing this until I get all the way back to the front. And the strands that I'm picking up are actually the live stitches that we threaded the yarn through and cinched shut. So these stitches are the means of holding the ends of the border together as well. Alright, now that is all stitched up, and I'm going to bring my needle back up to the corners so that I can bring the corners together. So I'm going to slip in between the two layers of the border and come out right at the fold line on that seam. And I'm going to take a whole stitch, the whole stitch that's on the fold, 2 strands of yarn, and then 2 from this side. And then I'm going to take the next 2 and then the next 2 from this side. And that is the corner. And I'm going to tie a knot here on the back. And then I will weave that tail in to the inside of the border in a minute. Now I'm going to take this slip stitch border right here, and I'm going to finish this off as seamless as possible. So as you can see, this slip stitch border over here, it does hide a little bit because of the way, because it's squishing a bunch of layers together, so the layers puff up around the row of stitching, so it kind of looks like a running stitch instead of a slip stitch, but it is still a slip stitch. So I'm going to take this tail from the slip stitches in the blue, and I'm going to run over here and grab the 2 front loops of a slip stitch from this side. And then I'm going to go back down in the same place where my yarn was coming from before I went under those, right down the middle of that last slip stitch. And I want to make sure that it's coming out on the stitching line and not somewhere else on the back. And that finishes off the row of slip stitches. And I'm actually going to stretch out a little this very first slip stitch so that it looks about the same size as the blue one. And that is my finished corner. It's not quite as perfect as the other one, which was knitted like that. It has the 2 colors knitted together. So it's not quite as perfect, but it is close enough that you can't really tell unless you're a knitter. So I'm going to finish it off and tie all of the tails together when I can. Like these 2 I will probably tie together since they're both on the back. These 2 I will probably leave loose and just tie knots in them, and then feed them through the border tube so that they stay hidden in there and then they can't wiggle their way out.